Sure, sure. Well, I am delighted to see you all. I was struggling actually to get into this event as well. I think there are so many people signed up for it. That's very exciting. But welcome to the Charlottesville Regional Chamber of Commerce. This topic today has been an issue that has been really driving a lot of conversation for at least 6 or 7 months. I think everybody has been waiting for the moment that businesses will reopen and what liability issues are out there for businesses potentially. So I'm very excited for the event. Andrea, do you have the speaker bio information?
I I do. I have it before me. Let me admit Shannon. All right. Could you give me a few seconds though? Maybe have
Absolutely.
some folks engage while I set this up because I really wanted to get on
Absolutely.
Facebook. All right.
While we are waiting to go live, I have a question for all of you. You can either use the
Okay.
chat box or you can simply raise your hands. How many of you have stayed open throughout the COVID crisis situation? Have some of you stayed completely in business? Yeah, it looks like quite a few of you have. How many of you, can you tell us if you have had everybody on your staff or the majority of people working from home or from a remote location? Yeah, it looks like we have some of those folks too. What would be great, because we're going to be a little tight on time, I think, is if you can go ahead and start listing questions in the chat box that we have for our speaker, because I think there's going to be a ton of questions about people coming back to work. And I know I've got a few questions specifically regarding the liability issue and how to most safely protect your own business from any legal exposure. What other questions do people have out there?
Okay. Well, it didn't. We'll just move forward. Okay.
Can we
All right. So
require employees to have shots? That's a huge question, Libby.
HFH. Oh, Habitat for Humanity. Okay. All right. Right. All right. Okay. Well, I am ready to read David's bio, Elizabeth.
Okay,
So,
let's
yeah.
go.
All right. And I do want to, because I see her on the call here, recognize Libby Edwards Allball. We've had this discussion in several of our affinity groups, but, Libby picked up the phone and said, okay, you all need to put something together to offer this. And we appreciate our chamber members sharing something that they're interested in and seeing how we can be of benefit to our members. And this is definitely something beneficial to our members, as the question has come up a lot. So thank you, Libby, and the other chamber members for that. And we are excited to have David here today. David is a partner with Michie Hamlett and a graduate of the 2010 class of Leadership Charlottesville. Go, David, who's helped us a lot with that program. And we appreciate his volunteerism with that. So let me read a little bit about Dave. He primarily focuses on business litigation, business employer counseling, fiduciary litigation, including will challenges and trust lawsuits. He also has extensive experience in construction litigation, securities litigation, and arbitration, and real estate disputes. Dave is a native of Virginia. He attended Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology in Alexandria before matriculating to Swarthmore College and the University of Virginia School of Law. Following graduation, he clerked for the Honorable Danny Reeves in Federal District Court in Kentucky, where he was exposed to a wide array of federal litigation as well as appellate litigation before the Sixth Circuit. Dave then moved to Washington, D.C. to practice with a large national firm based out of Palo Alto, California, representing technology companies in commercial, securities, and antitrust litigation. He then moved to a regional litigation firm where he practiced in the area of products liability before coming back to Charlottesville. So we are glad to have Dave Thomas, and you're going to unmute yourself, Dave. Dave Thomas with Michie Hamlett here to speak to us about COVID-19 vaccines and employer liability. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Andrea. Good afternoon, everybody. I hate to disappoint you. I am much less impressive than the bio Andrea just read, but I am printing that out and taking it home and showing it to my wife because it does make me sound really nice. So we're here today to talk about two questions, one that's kind of relatively easy and straightforward, and one where the ultimate answer is shoulder shrug for those who can see me. So I'm going to take up the one where I actually have a decent answer, and I'm going to give you a little bit less of the normal lawyer, well, on the one hand, but on the other. And that's the question of mandatory vaccinations. And I've got a slideshow or a PowerPoint to move through, but I'll only show you a couple of the slides on the theory that it's slightly more interesting to look at me than it is to look at a static slide. So this primary question, can employers require vaccinations? The question that's on everybody's mind. And the answer is, generally speaking, yes. Yes, you can. There are, of course, certain exceptions because lawyers were involved in all of this. And so the general rule, you can require vaccinations as a condition of continued employment. You can require vaccinations as a condition of new employment, except the areas you're probably already used to accommodating for other medically related issues. And that's primarily medical accommodations, primarily under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then religious accommodations. Here, where people may have a bona fide religious objection to vaccinations more generally. So what does that mean? Well, there is a class of people, as we know, who or for whom the COVID-19 vaccines are not medically recommended. And there's a list. We can go through it. I think CDC has it up if you frankly just Google it. The hiccup, of course, is that you, generally speaking, are not allowed to ask whether or not they are on that list. So, you know, let's say the CDC list included things like compromised autoimmune disorder or an autoimmune disorder, right? That's one of the classes of people for whom the vaccine is not currently recommended. And so you say to your workforce, all right, everybody has to get vaccinated. And they come back and they say, well, I can't, or I'm not supposed to. Generally speaking, you are not allowed to ask the follow-up, well, why not? Because it is a question that is designed to elicit the type of information you are, generally speaking, not allowed to ask or have. On the religious accommodation, obviously, there's a little bit more leeway. Having said that, of course, beyond having someone tell you, well, based on my religious beliefs, I'm refusing the COVID vaccination. In both circumstances, I would suggest ending your inquiry right there, unless you are in the type of industry where the employee in question has a great deal of individual contact with customers, clients, however you define the members of the public with whom you interact. Okay. So let me see if I can make the actual slideshow work and we can talk about it, because the EEOC has issued some guidance on this point. Let's see. Andrea and I practiced this beforehand, meaning there is about a 30% chance I'm going to get it right here on the back end. All right. And Andrea, I'll trust you to tell me if I've gotten this wrong, if people can't see the slide in question.
But just keep in mind, we see your notes. So whatever you did
All right,
last time, we get rid of that, unless you don't care.
Let's see if I can make that work. How about now? Better?
Nope. Okay.
Nope. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
We'll
Let me
get
try
it.
that again. See,
And
as I promised, only about a 50% chance I was going to get it right. Nope, still not right. And one last try. No. All right. Well, I apologize, everybody. If people
take
don't
it from
mind
the
looking
beginning,
at
Dave.
actual-
Hit
Yeah.
from the beginning again.
No, still not doing it.
Okay.
All right. Well, if everybody doesn't mind looking at my actual notes, then that's where we'll go. So,
Make it a little bigger.
yeah. All right.
Oh, we're all being
think
patient
after all
because
the
we
time-
understand. We
I
understand.
think after all the times I had done this, all right, well, here we go. Everyone can just look at the actual piece of it. All right.
Okay.
So here's where we are. There is the EEOC guidance on this point. And what the EEOC has said, and by and large, I think they are generally right, is that if you say to everybody, you must have proof of vaccination as a condition of continued employment, that asking for proof of the receipt, right, that little card that people get when they get vaccinated, is not likely to, it's not designed to elicit information about a disability, because all you're asking is, show me this piece of paper. And so they have said, well, that's not a disability-related inquiry. And I think a court is likely to agree with them on that point. But, as I said before, subsequent questions such as, well, why not? Why didn't you get it? That's where you run into trouble, and you run into this question, or where you run into the secondary standard, the secondary question of, is your inquiry job-related and consistent with business necessity? And we'll come back to that in a minute. Because the reality of it is, for the most part, the answer is probably not. And I'll explain why. All right. So what does that mean? That's job-related and consistent with business necessity. All right, so where are we here now? Well, so you told everybody you have to get vaccinated because you've decided that that's important for your enterprise. And lots of, most people will come and they'll show you the card and they'll say, yep, I was excited to get vaccinated. This is great. I haven't seen, my kids haven't seen their grandparents in a year. We rushed out and got the first appointment we could. Great. Now we're talking about the subset who either are reluctant to show, want to tell you it's none of your business, or for legitimate reasons cannot get vaccinated at this point in time. Then it becomes a question of, can you ask them why? Can you explore whether or not the reason they haven't gotten the vaccine that you are requiring is legitimate? And this is where you get into the job-related and consistent with business necessity. Because you say, I appreciate that you haven't done it, but I need to know why. We need to know. I'm going to ask the questions I normally wouldn't ask. So it's a two-part inquiry. Is it vital to the business? And is it no broader or more intrusive than necessary considering their job duties? And like I said, most of the time the answer to this question is going to be probably not, for two reasons. One, you basically have to be able to show that if this person doesn't get vaccinated, it is going to do material harm to your business. And if you work in an office, especially if you've been back in the office prior to the rollout of the vaccinations, it's probably not vital, right? Because you have successfully dealt with or successfully navigated a non-vaccinated employees for some number of months. And no broader, more intrusive. And this leads into this question of, have these other health and safety measures been working? Remote work arrangements, social distancing, masking. Have they enabled you to operate prior to the rollout of the vaccines in a way that has a minimal impact on your day-to-day operations? And if the answer to that question is yes, we've been able to make do with remote work, social distancing, and masking, then you probably are not looking at job-related and consistent with business necessity, as that term is used. In a sense, you are the victim, so to speak, of your own success. Now, there will be a handful. You haven't been back in the office at all. The person in question is I won't even say the receptionist, but the person who does significant intake for your enterprise. They do home visits. I'm sort of looking around at the enterprises represented in here. If this is an employee who you routinely send into other people's homes of non-vaccinated populations, right? Because of course this gets incredibly fact-specific. If it's like a home instead type of job or enterprise where you're sending them into the home of seniors, then vaccination may not be important because the clients are themselves fully vaccinated. But if they're working primarily with children who aren't eligible for vaccination yet, then that analysis may change. And I promise I am not trying to drum up business by telling you that if you are getting down into that granular of a level, please, please, please talk to a lawyer, whoever it is you talk to, about whether or not you can go beyond everybody needs to get vaccinated if you can't, beyond that point. Once you're getting into the, well, why didn't you get vaccinated? Please talk to whatever lawyer you talk to first before you ask that question. Because the last thing you want to do is face a lawsuit under the ADA. As I've said on many occasions, ADA discrimination type lawsuits are very expensive to lose and they're expensive to win. All right. So, backup question. All right, so Dave, you've scared us away from mandating vaccinations. Can we incentivize vaccinations? Can we say to everybody, gosh, we think this is a great thing, and now that vaccines, and I should qualify my last statement, but I think it's only going to matter for a couple of weeks, is I would not require vaccinations until Virginia declares vaccine appointments open for all. Once we get out of 1C and into general population, because you run into this problem of you're requiring something that may be impossible or would require an employee to lie to the government. I hope I don't have to go into why. That's a very bad thing if you make employees lie to the government. So can we incentivize it? Can we say to everybody, hey, look, if you'll get vaccinated, we'll give you a $1,000 bonus or an additional 8 hours of PTO. And I should separate this by saying, I'm not here talking about whether or not you could make going to the vaccine compensable time, i.e., you can get vaccinated on the clock, right? There's no problem with telling people we will either give you leave for or allow you to do it during work hours. That's not going to be an issue. But this is where you offer some kind of tangible incentive to people after and as a result of having gotten vaccinated. And the answer is yes, you can voluntarily incentivize vaccination, but I wouldn't. For exactly the same reasons we just talked about, is because you end up being in a position of saying, let's say you're going with a $1,000 bonus. Everybody who gets vaccinated gets a $1,000 bonus at the end of June as a celebration that we can return to full and normal operation. It sounds really good, except that you could effectively be saying, we're going to give a $1,000 bonus to everyone who doesn't have a medical condition. And hopefully everyone on this call has talked to a lawyer more than once and knows that if you said something like that, everybody who went to law school immediately seizes up, as does everybody who works in HR. But that is, in some ways, the practical effect of what you're saying. Or we're going to give a $1,000 bonus to everyone who's not a follower of the Christian Scientist faith, right? That's clearly illegal. But that is the practical impact of what you can be saying if you voluntarily incentivize vaccination. So is there a way to do it? Yes. Could you put something together that would allow for it? Probably. You may end up paying a lawyer more than you end up paying your employees, but it's possible. I wouldn't recommend it unless all else fails. I would frankly go down the job-related pathway of requiring it before I would incentivize it. All right. I know there are a lot of questions, so let me see if I can sort of skip through it. Oh, and what I'm saying here in terms of condition of employment also applies to new employment, whether that's making it a requirement for applicants, whether you would make it something that you would require between interview and when there's a conditional offer of employment outstanding, because the ABA rules on that are all basically the same, right? The thing you can't ask a current employee is the thing you can't make a condition of employment. It is a thing that you can't require between the making of the conditional offer and during employment. All right. So, like I said, at least there was some actual kind of answer. The second part of this question, or the second part of this session today here is, well, what about employer liability? I have a slide. I'm not going to show you because it's all of 8 words, and I'll tell you that the standard is that employers, at least as we know right now, are obligated to take reasonable steps to protect their employees and members of the public. Great. What does that mean? I have absolutely no idea, which is why I'm not going to bother to show you this slide. In some ways, it's no different than your obligation now, which is as an employer, you are obligated to take reasonable steps to protect the health, safety, and well-being of employees and people who access your facilities or who interact with your employees. Your employees, your jaunt, and you have employees who drive buses, you're obligated to take some reasonable steps to make sure that they aren't driving drunk or have no idea what they're doing with the bus. I see Habitat for Humanity's on, right? So Habitat has some obligation to make sure that its employees aren't around firing nail guns at people who drive by on the street. It's a ridiculous example, but also makes me laugh at the idea as I think about it. I think what that is going to mean is it's going to be tied up in the front part of that, which is if your employees regularly interact with members of the general public, and if the intermediate steps of social distancing, mask wearing, minimizing contact are not going to cut it anymore, then yes, I can see down the road a court ultimately saying that you should have required vaccination of that employee before you let them do their job, assuming none of those other steps worked and you kind of knew none of those other steps are going to work. As opposed to, well, we've been doing it for 6 months with masking, with social distancing. We haven't had any reports of a spreader event. We haven't had any reports of any of our employees getting sick, any of our customers getting sick. So we felt that we were taking reasonable steps by continuing those precautions, but by not requiring vaccinations. And I think, I'm hoping, there is going to be a reluctance on the part of judges and others to second guess that kind of reasonable business judgment. Because, like I said, that is the standard. And if any of us could predict what would actually be required, well, we'd have gotten way out in front of this before it actually happened. Remember also, and this is the part I've sort of thought about every time there's been a debate about Republicans in Congress wanting to pass some kind of COVID liability shield, is the fact of the matter is it's going to be nearly impossible to actually prove causation. You would have to be able to show that the exposure, that a member of the general public comes down with COVID, and they say, oh, I think it was because I interacted with your employee, or I came to your restaurant or your shop or your place of business. Well, what we know is that it is basically impossible to figure out when and how someone got infected. We CDC, through contact tracing and otherwise, can suspect, like, oh, you went to this motorcycle rally where 1,000 other people got sick. We think that's probably where you got it, but it's also possible that you got it at the 7-Eleven on the way back home, or that you got it from your uncle who thinks mask wearing is a hoax. The ability to prove that person A got it as a result of interaction with person B is going to be next to impossible. And so actually facing long-term liability in these situations, I have no idea how somebody is going to ultimately be able to prove that 2.5 years from now if a lawsuit they file tomorrow ends up going all the way to trial. So, like I said, I don't have a great answer for you, except to say that I think protecting yourself from liability in the COVID area and for COVID exposure is basically going to be subject to the same standard and the same steps you take now, which is do the best you can, act reasonably, don't do the things that seem dangerous or that have had a bad history. Do keep doing the things that seem to be working. It was asked at the start who's been back. We at Michie Hamlett have been back in the office since June with a work from home if you need to, with a quarantining policy in place if anybody suspects they were exposed. And knock on wood, we have not had any reported cases of COVID exposure. Does that mean we're doing it right or just getting lucky? I don't know. But I can't believe somebody would say that by continuing to do what's been working for the last 9 months, we aren't acting reasonably. Okay. So I see that there are a bunch of questions. Andrea, you just want me to roll through? I can start just taking them from top to bottom.
That's what you want to do. Go on. Go for it.
All right. All right. So first question, do we need to have copies of vaccination forms for the employees that have gotten vaccinated? I would have some methodology of it. Well, let me answer it two ways. If you're going to require it, then yes. I would have some manner or method of keeping track of who has confirmed it for you. Otherwise, the most I would do is tell people that if they want to provide you with that information, they can. Because what we didn't talk about, the flip side of it, is that there is no problem with employees or potential employees volunteering that information. And in fact, I think that's going to be a thing smart job applicants are going to do as a way of making themselves more attractive in the near term, is saying, yes, in addition to meeting all of the qualifications you've posted, by the way, I'm also fully vaccinated, knowing that, especially in public interfacing positions, that is going to make them more attractive. And so saying to people that, they can provide proof of vaccination is fine. But if requiring it, like I said, or requiring keeping copies of the paperwork, if you've required, runs into all of the same issues that we just talked about. All right, next one's more of a half question comment about that there could not be a mandate for a vaccine until there was FDA approval as opposed to the EUA that's been issued. I've read that too, but I've never seen any basis for it because the emergency use authorization has all of the same force and effect as full-out FDA approval, which is why we're all out there getting the shots. I have my first shot on Tuesday, and I'm very excited to be getting a shot, which is the first time I've ever said that in my entire life. So I don't know of any legal distinction between the EUA that's been issued and full formal FDA approval, which frankly isn't going to come until after everybody's been vaccinated based on normal FDA channels. Can associates be exempt from vaccination due to religious beliefs? Yes. There are absolutely bona fide held religious beliefs of particular religions or subgroups that prohibit vaccination. You may have already dealt with some of these if they are, I want to say the term anti-vaxxer without being pejorative, just people who are opposed to vaccinations on religious grounds. And, you know, while obviously that's a case-by-case basis, it's also not one where you want to get into the weeds of evaluating other people's religious beliefs. All right. Can we require separate experiences, different PPE standards, et cetera, for vaccinated and non-vaccinated volunteers? Yes. This fits into that reasonable precautions area, right? What was the CDC guidance? I laughed when I was trying to keep it straight, that vaccinated grandparents could be with unvaccinated children, but one unvaccinated grandparent shouldn't be with unvaccinated children, even if mom and dad are vaccinated. So the short answer to that question is you absolutely can, because again, it's all about taking reasonable steps to protect, in this case, volunteers, but employees and members of the public. And so saying for folks who have been fully vaccinated, I think right now the standard is 4 weeks after the second shot, or if you get the Johnson & Johnson, the only shot, that after 4 weeks there should be full efficacy of the vaccination of the regime. And saying at that point you don't have to wear full-blown, all-over PPE, mask and shield. Maybe it's just mask at that point, maybe it's just face shield, maybe it's nothing. I suspect that a lot of places are still going to require their employees to wear masks for the look of it for people coming in, because I think for the next several months it's going to be very weird to walk into a place and see absolutely no one wearing masks. And this is Charlottesville. We are still probably on the leading edge of being cautious when it comes to interacting without masks on. But yes, you're at that point taking reasonable steps. Put another way, you could explain to a neutral third party why these people have to wear masks and why these people don't, and you could do it on a reasonable basis. Is there a difference between public employees versus private employees when requiring vaccines? I've been trying to avoid giving the classic lawyer answer for most of this presentation, and now I can't jump away from it anymore. The answer is it depends. It depends on whether or not the employees of the public employer have statutory or regulatory rights that are not always available to private employees. And as far as I can tell from what I've read and from what I've seen, I'm not aware of any public employee who has a right to refuse a reasonable safety rule or safety standard put in place by a public employer. But I will admit I have not done a deep dive into that particular aspect. And so I think that's going to have to be a case-by-case or an employer-by-employer inquiry that's made. Is there anything in state or local law or state the Virginia Regulatory Code which prohibits me from requiring these employees? I should note, although you usually don't run into this in Virginia, that there could also be, if you have a unionized workforce or if any part of your workforce is unionized, the contract that you have with that union could bear on this, right? Some union contracts prohibit surprise or discretionary testing, for instance. And I would want to look at the specifics of that provision before I said, oh yeah, go ahead and, despite the union contract, require those people to get vaccinated. It could be something that's subject to further discussion with the union in question. Oh, there's a Swarthmore shout out. Always positive when someone's heard from my little college outside of Philadelphia. All right. I own a restaurant, but only servicing takeout right now and opening indoors in April. Can we offer employees info on vaccinations? Yes, absolutely. There is absolutely no prohibition on telling everyone, if you want to get vaccinated, here's where it is. There's no prohibition on setting it up. I mean, some of you may do flu shots on site. We do, right? We have enough employees that one day in October, a nurse comes by and gives everybody who wants it a flu shot. Making it available is never a problem. Where you get into trouble is where you require it to be done. And so telling people, here are the clinics, or, like my friends and I have been doing, feels like vaccine treasure hunting. Somebody will send out a link of like, Jefferson Pharmacy in Fluvanna, that's where I'm getting mine on Tuesday. I found that out about 6 hours before NBC 29. Passing that information around, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And then the follow-up is, what info do we need to include in employee handbooks? I'll be honest, at this point, I probably wouldn't update the employee handbook until you have made a decision on whether or not you are going to require vaccinations, and if so, are you just going to stop at requiring it, but noting that exemptions or exceptions are available on medical or religious bases, or are you going to do something in between? I would just keep it as sort of an informal guidance until you've made that decision, and then I would absolutely talk to whoever helped you compile your handbook in the first place to figure out exactly how you're going to write down that requirement. All right. Let's see. Working with a community chorus, do our singers, all of whom join by audition and pay a membership fee, fall under a category different from employees or customers, and can we legally mandate vaccination as a requirement of singing in person with the chorus? I mean, I think the answer is that if you have the authority, and this would be sort of more generally true, if you have the authority to exclude people for whatever reason, volunteer signups all the way up to job applicants, that you can require vaccination as a condition of employment, volunteering, association, whatever it is. I think at some point you probably get into trouble if you run into something that might be protected by the First Amendment, right? Like, could the Charlottesville Democratic Party require vaccinations before people can attend a Democratic caucus? Probably not, right? Because there's a First Amendment right involved there. But I don't know the answer to that. I will freely admit I am not a First Amendment scholar on freedom of association. But I would say if you right now have the authority to exclude people from whatever it is you are doing, then you can make vaccination a condition, just like payment of a membership fee, auditioning, or anything else, volunteering. Somebody asked, to clarify, are you suggesting to wait for general availability of the vaccine before mandating? Yes, I am, because there are plenty of people who aren't lawfully supposed to be getting the vaccine right now. For those of you wondering, all of the weight I have put on since law school puts me into category 1B. BMI may be a ridiculous classification, but Virginia put it out there and I qualify. So I am not breaking any rules by getting the vaccine on Tuesday, but you'd have employees who probably would be. And like I said earlier, I wouldn't say you have to be vaccinated to work here, and then they say, well, but I can't get the vaccine. What do you want me to do, lie to the government? And you say, yeah. That's going to get you in a lot more trouble than waiting a couple of weeks for vaccination and continuing doing what you've been doing until that time. Let's see. Are you saying all teachers in K-12 with children should be vaccinated? That is 100% not a debate I am getting into, in part because that fits into the public employer, and it gets involved with the Virginia Education Association. I will say personally, and in no way giving of legal advice, that my children have been back in school since August at the Covenant School. And I believe there have been exactly 2 cases in that 8-month period. So personally, I think the benefits to children of being in person outweigh the risks. But I am not the governor. I am not the Secretary of Education. And absolutely nobody cares what I think about this topic otherwise. All right. Does the fact that we are in a declared state of emergency change employer liability? I don't know the answer to that question. I think it will. I think there is going to be more leeway given to employers dealing with an unknown situation, provided that after the fact or during, they can justify what they were doing and it doesn't seem arbitrary or targeted at any particular group. I think there will be a lot of leeway given on the back end of this, of people saying, look, based on what we knew, this is what we did to keep people safe. But unfortunately, we won't find out the answer to that question for somewhere between 12 and 36 months as people get sued and either win or lose. All right. In the hotel business, every associate is guest-facing. Is this sufficient condition of employment? Probably not, because there's a difference between interacting with members of the general public and having that be an essential component of your job. So, you know, the old rule here was 6:15, right? If you're within 6 feet of somebody for 15 minutes or more, that was considered a risk of exposure that if that person tested positive, you should self-quarantine. So, for instance, unless somebody is doing something wrong checking into a hotel, hopefully it doesn't take 15 minutes to do the check-in. Same thing with a bank teller. And, you know, banks have been operating very successfully using drive-through and those cool pneumatic tubes that I love as a way to limit the person-to-person exposure. So I think you are going to have a very hard time convincing anyone that every single person who works for your enterprise is a public-facing employee subject to the exact same standard. It's going to make it look like you didn't undertake a job classification by job classification review of the people for whom it was absolutely necessary versus just preferred and would be kind of nice if. All right. Let's see. All right. On the nonprofit side of things, is there a requirement on who should verify vaccination? In other words, should a staff member do it, or could a volunteer, such as a board officer, also verify? I'm not aware of any distinction. You know, I would say that if you have what I will call if you have a HIPAA officer, so to speak, I know it's not an actual thing, but a person in HR, an office administrator, or whomever you charge with being the person who deals with that kind of information, I would stick with it. I would have that person be responsible. Otherwise, just having someone who collects paperwork. So you institute a vaccination mandate, and then you say, show proof of vaccination to person X. Probably better if it's an employee of the organization, just because you can exercise a little bit more control over an employee than you can a volunteer, a board member, or something else like that. That's not a legal requirement. That's just, I'm not even sure it's a best practice. It's probably just what I would do. And again, in part because remember that, this is an aside, your employees owe a certain duty of loyalty to your enterprise that a volunteer, even a board member, may not. And so I would want to have that backstop if that's the person who's collecting all the information. All right. Would you recommend having employees who decline being vaccinated sign a declination form? No. 2 reasons. One, why? What's the point? If they've told you they aren't getting vaccinated and you can't inquire into why, what does having them sign a piece of paper do? And I would be worried that it would elicit, even if the form itself just said, I, David Thomas, affirm that I have declined vaccination, period. And it doesn't go on to say for some legitimate reason or for a reason you aren't allowed to ask about. The person handing out the form could say, well, why not? And then you're going to go, and because you can't control that, I wouldn't have the piece of paper. It doesn't do anything for you. It doesn't get you anything. And it is just rife with potential issues down the road. All right. if they don't know if vaccinated people are spreaders, don't we still have some of the same issues? Yes, but. I said earlier on that I think you will see people still having a requirement for vaccinated people to wear masks, even after they themselves have been vaccinated, until we are a place where basically everyone or close to everyone has been vaccinated. And it's for that reason that we really don't know. And so taking a precaution to protect against the unknown is a pretty reasonable step to take. And so, plus, the fact of the matter is that enough people are worried about that, that walking into a place where no one's wearing a mask because you just tell them, by the way, we've all been vaccinated, so nobody in here wears a mask, enter at your own risk, is probably not going to end up being a great business decision for people who interface with the public on a regular basis. So, you know, again, it comes down to this reasonableness standard that I know is the most lawyer thing to be said during this presentation. But what's reasonable is going to depend on the facts of the situation, right? Because on the one hand, you're an office of 3 people, all 3 of you have been vaccinated, then not having a mask requirement is reasonable based on what we know. But you have an office of 10 people, 2 of whom haven't been vaccinated, 1 of whom may never get vaccinated, then requiring the 8 vaccinated people to wear a mask anytime the 2 unvaccinated people are there, but letting them take it off when it's just a room full of vaccinated people, that's also going to be reasonable. And, you know, we're just going to have to hope that if people are exercising their best judgment and acting reasonably, that's what's going to work out, that there isn't going to be a penalty for that down the road. Beyond that, I don't have a lot more to say. All right, and then one more. Is there any manner that we know of through which someone can reliably verify their vaccination if when someone loses their vaccine record card? I don't know. I strongly suspect that we are going to end up with some kind of universal electronic form or format of vaccination record. I have no idea how we're going to get from here to there, but given all the chatter about proof of vaccination for airlines, trains, other forms of public transportation, they're going to have to come up with something. I think the European Union may only be a week or 2 away from having some sort of universal government record. And hopefully, while I was stalling, somebody answered the question in the chat that you can go online and get a copy on the VA-MS website. So the answer to the specific question is yes, apparently you can get another copy of your vaccination record, but I also think we're going to end up with some kind of universal show it on your phone, you know, card in your wallet kind of system. All right, so I think that is all of the questions that are in the chat, and with a couple of minutes to spare.
So I added one last question. Maybe you could answer real quick. So what can the employer legally do if when they learn of an employee who has the virus? And the second part to that, is an employer required to inform their employer?
Right. So hopefully all of you all have had a quarantining/exposure policy in place since, what was it? August or September, when the Commonwealth of Virginia required you to have such a program in place. And so, for instance, I'll tell you what ours is, which is that we do require people to notify us if they have tested positive or have a reasonable belief that they have been exposed to someone who was positive. Now, how do we prove that? I have absolutely no idea, and we're an office full of lawyers. Because if they don't tell us, and we don't know, and we don't find out, but we have a policy that requires them to tell us. And then if they tell us, we then notify without naming names, unless they've consented to their name being given out, the Typhoid Mary in this scenario. we ask that person, who have you been in contact with within the last week, within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes. That's that 615 I referred to earlier. And they give us a list. And then we notify all of those people, hey, someone that you've had regular contact with in the last 7 days has tested positive or believe they may have been exposed. You have to go home, because we're lucky enough that all of our employees can work from home. So we tell them you have to go home until, and then there's the CDC published a list. It was like 5 days after a negative test taken more than 5 days after the exposure, or 14 days after symptoms first appeared, or there's a third one, but there's a list. And that's been the rule. We've had 2 shutdowns, so to speak, not whole office, just groups of people where we've said, okay, employees A, B, and C, you have to go home until one of these things is true. Oh, I remember. Or the potentially infected person passes one of those as well. So we know the person that we were worried about contact with is in fact negative. That has been technically it was a requirement now for months and months and months. And we are going to continue doing it until everybody has been vaccinated. There was a second part of your question, Andrew, I've completely forgotten.
Are employees required to inform their employer?
Yes. Oh, good.
Yeah.
So I answered that
Yeah.
part first.
Yeah. Okay. And I think those were all the questions. And Dave, this is just very informative, and I thank you so much for taking your time to answer our members' questions. And I want to thank the members as well for being part of this important conversation. We know everyone's trying to do right by their organization, themselves, their employer, their employees, and this is helpful information. And before I turn it over to Elizabeth to close us out, I want to take this opportunity to thank our board members who have joined us, our chamber board members, as well as some of our partners in trust, and to thank you, our chamber members, for your support of our Chamber of Commerce. It's people like Dave who volunteer to help us provide these informative seminars and to be able to do what we do here at the Chamber of Commerce, and wonderful suggestions like Libby shared with us. And if you have some seminar ideas that you think would be good for us to put on as a chamber, just send me an email or give us a call and we'll certainly do it. All right. And I turn it over to Elizabeth.
Yeah, well, thanks, everybody. And Andrea actually just took the words right out of my mouth. I am so grateful that we have such a knowledgeable group of chamber members. And really at the chamber, what we're trying to do is convene the right people at the right time to make the right decisions about their work. And so, Dave, I really appreciate all the great information you provided. And I invite all of you who are on the call today, when you have questions like this, and thanks again, Libby, for suggesting this program. When you have questions like this, if the chamber doesn't have the answers, I'm quite certain we have chamber members who might have the answer or can help you. So please do stay in touch with us, and we will continue creating this kind of programming whenever we see a need for it or whenever you do. So thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, Andrea, for putting it together.
Yeah. And if you want to watch it again, it's on our Facebook page. And yeah, because it's a lot of information that was shared. And please share it with your friends as well. All right. Thank you all. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank y'all.
Thanks, Dave.